The EFF is calling for a new statement of intent on a government of national unity, which excludes the DA and the Freedom Front Plus. This call comes as discussions to form a seventh administration are being impacted by ideological differences and demands for cabinet positions. Various parties, including the DA, the IFP, the FF Plus, and the Patriotic Alliance, have already signed the pact to join the GNU with the ANC. But the EFF wants a new agreement anchored on equality.
From that letter, there is nothing new that we have not discussed with the ANC from day one, that we're going to participate in the reorganizing of this nation. Under this situation, we will find ourselves where there's no outright winner in terms of the elections. And that's exactly what we've done. So we've released that letter and we've pointed the issues that we think it's the best interest of the ANC to work with parties like the EFF and other progressive parties that not seek to bring back racism, not to bring back this country to be under the imperialist control. Parties that will make sure that this country, it can continue with what it envisioned. The ANC must come onto our side. Let's put the interests of our people at hand. Let's forget about these threats that are coming from these markets and the owners of the economy, because we know that it's for their own selfish reasons and to make sure that they continue profiteering in this country in the exploitation and the exclusion of the majority black people. So we're appealing to the ANC that they must fund it themselves, they must be brave. Whatever the agreements maybe they had with them, if they come prior 1994, but it's the time now, they've lost power.
For more on this, we speak to political commentator and lecturer at the Central University of Technology, Leeto Nthoba. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika, and thank you so much for your time. Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Chaba. Thank you for having me.
On paragraph C of the letter to the ANC, the EFF says the participation of the DA and Freedom Front Plus only seeks to neutralize the economic transformation the ANC and EFF represent, such as the creation of state banks and free education. How do you think the EFF believe the DA and FF Plus would neutralize the economic transformation efforts?
Well, the DA has been totally honest about how they feel about BEE, triple BEE, and even employment equity. So they believe that these are not equal basis of competition for people to be in the marketplace, right? They also speak about how both parties, Freedom Front Plus and DA, speak about how the unionization of the South African economy has a blight on the economic state of the country, where people must negotiate on their own and on merit and not in a group manner like we are doing now. So all of these gains are what the progressive left have always leaned upon, right? That's why COSATU leans so heavily on the ANC, because that closeness is there in the gains that they've made in the labor market. And so I think there are some things that are directly opposed by the DA and Freedom Front Plus that would be stumbling blocks, especially when you're talking about them and the ANC coming into a partnership. Especially if you think about the fact that the DA was also demanding the higher education department, which they wanted to revoke what NSFAS is currently and turn it into another new model that is not all-inclusive or considerate of those who were previously disadvantaged. So those kinds of examples show that there is no real congruity between the ANC and the DA when it comes to certain policy positions, especially those around labor, those around color, and those around redress.
So, Leeto, what are the implications on South Africa's political future if the ANC decides to not adhere to the EFF's demands?
So, again, I've always maintained that these activities, even though are annoying in the short term, in the long term, are great for the South African party political system, Because this is not a government of national unity, right? It's a nice term to put forward. It's a nice marketable term, but it's actually coalition talks, because a government of national unity would have included the EFF anyway from the word go. But the way in which it was negotiated in this sort of fire sale way means that the EFF was excluded because those who were ideologically opposed to them rushed to sign documents that they couldn't get to, right? And they were still negotiating. So if you think about it, right now, the lack of maturity in our system is showing, right? We're still talking about petty things like race, whether Orania should exist, what should we have unions or shouldn't we have unions? What are the bases for negotiation, and what education system do we want, and how do we educate those who are previously disadvantaged? These are really primitive ways of negotiating a real sustainable government. And we're still in these sort of infantile stages of our governance that we can't get past the race politics, right? Because in my opinion, in keeping the government on the straight and narrow, I think the Freedom Front Plus and the EFF could play really pivotal roles, because they are not anywhere interested in the survival of the ANC. And for the most part, don't really care what the markets do, because they're not going to win the next election outright. And so if you put them as accountability mechanisms in places like Scopa, in charge of policing, in charge of prosecutions, those two parties are so opposed to each other that they'll want to outdo each other in policing the state that has always run rampant with corruption. Those kind of things would have been beneficial. But before they even get to those level of talks, they're talking about each other's skin color, which is really, really backward and not really progressive for South African politics.
In light of the fact that you speak of primitive ways of putting together a government, what conversations should they be having?
The conversation that should be first and in the forefront of these negotiations is what is best for South Africans. What hardships have South Africans suffered that can be resolved in the next 5 years? You look at the people in KwaZulu-Natal and how they started to vote for the MK. They've been hard done by, not only by the government letting them down, but also have been ravished by natural disasters. Natural disasters are probably on the way for the Eastern Cape as well, like a drought and all of those things that the CSIR has put to the government. And so you should be talking about those things to say, how do we do best by those who have been hard done by the government? How do we fix the infrastructure problems of the Eastern Cape without rampant production or corruption? How do we fix the electricity crisis in the country? How do we revamp our transport systems in order for them to be fair and equitable, not only to business, but to also individuals who use these things? And so the problem is there is no talk about South Africans and what's best at heart for them, but the talks are about who's getting what position and what that means for the power matrix of the party, but also the power matrix of the individuals inside the party. None of the talks to this point have spoken about what South Africans need and what South Africans were trying to say at the ballot box. The South African public was trying to say at the ballot box, we are not happy with your leadership. All of you are not doing well by us, so none of you are going to be leading us in a majority. But none of these parties are listening. Instead, they're trying to jostle for power to see who gets to get the scraps when the giant called the ANC dies. And I think that is the greatest folly of this whole negotiation process.
So on paragraph 13.A, the EFF says they're proposing new agreement between the ANC and the EFF. Now, what I want to know from you, Leeto, is do you think that the ANC will be willing to renegotiate and consider the EFF's proposed agreement, or will they stick to their initial offer?
It's a shaky proposition. Remember that the ANC and the EFF are appealing to the same base of voters, right? Even though the EFF is trying to go in with the younger voter and then capture the older voter as they progress in their governance journey. And so even with that difference, the problem there is if you put a government together along with the ANC and EFF, one would start to leach from the other. And it is very clear and obvious to all South Africans that the ANC is hemorrhaging hope, it's hemorrhaging votes, is hemorrhaging any kind of figure that the ANC held in 1994. And that could easily be latched onto by the EFF to grow itself, because it has no self-interests or the same self-interests that the ANC does. And that kind of growth could be detrimental to the ANC, even though it could be helpful to the South African people. And so the ANC is also making that decision. What is best for the ANC? The ANC would be best placed with the Freedom Front Plus and the DA, because they're not really jostling for the same kind of voter. And they could try to wrestle back voters from the EFF while the EFF sort of languishes in the periphery as the opposition. And so that is the kind of chess that the ANC is playing now. Who is the best devil to walk with while trying to get back my health?
Better the devil you know, right? So let's talk about BOSA now for a second. They say that their door is not closed to the GNU. They want a mixed economy that creates jobs. So what do you think are specific characteristics, Leeto, or features that define a mixed economy in BOSA's view?
Again, for me, BOSA is overreaching, right? It's being way too aspirational. You can't come into a negotiation and say, yeah, my first port of call is to change the economy. The economy is a huge, complex animal. So you can't just come and say, oh no, let's change it to mixed, as if it's what moving from one part of the textbook to the other. There are certain mechanisms that you need to put forward in order for a mixed economy to happen like they want it to happen. I think BOSA is missing a great opportunity here, because what we see on the other side, right? So let's make a comparative. On the other side, the Freedom Front Plus, although seems like a lame duck in the GNU as it is now, they are actually the silent anchoring voice that's trying to calm all of these sort of characters down.
Whoa. What do you mean by that?
Yes. So a lot of people don't know, but the Freedom Front Plus has been doing a lot of work in the background, researching what makes coalition governments work and how to facilitate the talks within coalition governments. And so that's why you don't see any clear position that the Freedom Front Plus wants, right? They have no clear, straight demands, except for saying Orania must be recognized. That's the only one thing that they're bringing to the table. But everything else, they are the negotiators. They are trying to be the parent in the room full of loud kids, right? And so that role is very important, because if you think about it, they've always negotiated positions between people who have two opposing positions, like Helen Zille and Gayton McKenzie, right? In any situation, those people hate each other. But with Mulder and Groenewald in the middle, they bring them a little bit closer together, even though they're squabbling, will then learn to vote together through the squabble. BOSA could play the same part between the EFF and the ANC, because the bickering of the ANC and EFF will start to become louder if those two parties start to coalesce. And so BOSA could be the stabilizing voice that the Freedom Front Plus is on the other side. But my biggest problem with them is they haven't done the legwork that the Freedom Front Plus has done in trying to stabilize coalitions.
So BOSA hasn't done the legwork.
Yeah.
All right. So let's in a nutshell, and just to wrap it up, in conclusion, if BOSA joins the GNU, what role would Mmusi Maimane play, do you think, and how would his leadership style impact the coalition's dynamics?
So if he joins it as it exists now, he'll fade into obscurity. If he joins it with a new configuration of the EFF and ANC, he might be the shining star that he's always told us he is, the Obama of Africa. He might start to show up as that figure, but if he joins in the current configuration, he fades away into obscurity, and BOSA was a one-hit wonder.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Of course, this is political commentator and lecturer at the Central University of Technology, Leeto Nthoba.